So in this micro video, we're going to be briefly discussing how to be an effective moderator. First of all, we will review why effective moderating is important. We'll then discuss considerations before accepting to be a moderator. And then thirdly, we'll consider the major roles of a moderator. So let's first of all turn to then why effective moderating is important. So the moderator actually sets the tone for the session. A positive tone helps, firstly, for presenters to deliver in a relaxed atmosphere. Secondly, for the audience to be engaged and to learn. And thirdly, to create an effective and collegial environment for interactions between the presenter and the audience, particularly during the question and answer session. As you probably have recognized from attending the meetings, the Q&A session is obviously the most interesting and the most impactful during the course of an oral presentation session. So effective and collegial interactions are really important during that time. In addition to all that, as the level of the interaction increases, overall satisfaction of both presenters and the audience also increases. So increasing the level of interaction in sessions really does increase overall satisfaction, both for the speakers and also for the audience participants. So before considering to agree to moderate, you should check that you have no date-time conflicts with other commitments at the meeting. You do not want to be in a situation where you're double committed and you then ask one of your colleagues to moderate instead. That is not appropriate. You've been invited to be a moderator specifically because it's been considered that you have expertise and you're a specialist in the particular area that is going to be covered in the session that you've been invited to moderate in. You have to ask yourself also whether you are comfortable speaking in public. This is a public speaking engagement that you will be committing to. And it's important that you really feel comfortable being able to field people and to be able to deliver in a very confident way. Thirdly, you have to ask yourself whether you have adequate organizational skills to run a session well. As you'll see in the next few slides, organization is really important in running a session well as a moderator. And I think fourthly, and very importantly, can you inspire people to give their best effort? We're all there at the meeting to learn and to participate and to be engaged. And you want people to be inspired to give their best effort, whether it is the presenters or whether it is actually the audience participants. So a moderator actually has three roles. First of all, the moderator is a stage setter. Secondly, a moderator is a facilitator. And thirdly, a moderator is a timekeeper. Effectiveness in all three of these roles ensures effective management of the session and really does create a positive atmosphere for learning. So now let's consider pointers for being an effective stage setter. First and foremost, read the abstracts of the session you're moderating beforehand and come prepared with at least 2 questions for each presentation. Bring energy to the session. You want people to feel that you're excited about participating in the session and leading the session, which is what you're going to be doing as a moderator. Arrive in the room approximately 15 minutes ahead of the start time, and during this time, you want to introduce yourself to your co-moderator and also to the speakers. As you know, many of our speakers come from other countries. English is not necessarily going to be their first language, and their names may be quite unfamiliar to the way that we usually enunciate names. So make sure that you know how to pronunciate all the names of all the speakers. There's nothing worse than a moderator fumbling over a speaker's name when introducing them. Ensure that the speakers are familiar with the podium. This is important because you don't want to be in a situation where one of your speakers doesn't know, for example, how to change slides. It can be very disruptive to the attention that participants are giving to a presentation. So you want to make sure that your speakers are familiar with slide changing. They're familiar with the pointer, and they're also familiar with where the time clock is, and you should remind them that they should actually be observing the clock as their presentation is going underway. You should remind the speakers that it's very important to keep to time, that they only have 15 minutes in total for their presentation, 10 minutes of which should be occupied by the presentation themselves, and they should be allowing about 5 minutes for the question and answer session. So with all this in hand then, the stage setter is really setting the tone for the session. By preparing your speakers adequately ahead of time, it really does allow, I think, for them to feel comfortable when they walk up to the podium. And by the way, you should actually be taking them up to the podium. and letting them stand at the podium and look out at the audience so they get a feel of what it's going to be like when they actually arrive at the podium to give their presentation. So again, the stage setter then is really setting the tone for the session. Let's now turn to pointers for being an effective facilitator. As you open the session, first of all, announce the session name, then introduce yourself and your co-moderator, and then please remember to remind the participants to mute their cell phones and not to take any photographs of any of the slides during the presentations. Also, please remind the participants that if they are going to ask a question at the mic, to state their name and home institution or program before they actually start asking the question. The reason for this is that this anchors the audience as to who actually is asking the question, so that if at any time during the course of the meeting anybody wants to find that individual again because they're interested in what they had to say, then it obviously makes it much, much easier to track that person down if they've heard their name during the course of the session that you're moderating. In addition to the activities of a facilitator as you open the session, obviously during the session you've got to facilitate the flow of the session as presentations go from one to the next. So at the end of a presentation you should thank the presenter for their presentation, and then you should move along and introduce the next presentation with the title of the presentation and with the author's names. It's not necessary to give the institutions necessarily from which the presentation has arisen, but you can if you want to. But critically important, you do want to announce the title of the presentation and also the names of the authors. And in addition to that, I tend to also say what the name of the author is who's actually going to be giving the presentation. So as the facilitator then, you're ensuring a smooth running of the session, which of course is really important. If the session runs smoothly in this manner, then the quality of the session will be much more judged by the quality of the presentations than by the quality of you as a moderator, because you're doing a first-rate job. Okay, now moving on then to pointers for being an effective timekeeper. So pointers for being an effective timekeeper are as follows. It is your responsibility to keep the presentations running on time. No presenter should be shortchanged on their allocated 15-minute time slot. So make sure you start the clock at the start of each presentation. And if the presenter is still speaking after 10 minutes, please ask them to begin to wrap up their presentation. They should not speak really for much longer than 12 minutes. You do want to allow some time for questions and answers. So ideally, the allocation of time for the Q&A should be somewhere between 3 to 5 minutes, ideally closer to 5 minutes. So during the question and answer period, if there are no questions, ask one. There's nothing worse than a speaker being left sort of hanging at the podium after they've given their presentation and there are no questions. It gives an indication to the presenter that perhaps there wasn't any interest in their presentation. So with these questions that you have in your pocket that you previously prepared, pull one of them out and make sure you ask that. In addition to giving encouragement to the speaker, it also provides a catalyst to the audience, because after one question has been asked, often then somebody will feel comfortable going up to the microphone to ask a question themselves. However, if the microphone is being monopolized by somebody, ask that the discussion continues later. You do not want somebody to hold the floor at the microphone when you have a line of people behind them dying to ask a question at the mic. If a presentation ends early, or if there is a no-show, wait for the scheduled time to start the next presentation. This is important because you've got to make sure that your presentations in your session are running synchronously with the presentations of all the other sessions that's running concurrently during the meeting. There's nothing worse than somebody who is interested in two different presentations that are being held in different sessions, arriving at second session only to find that the second presentation is being wound down when really, according to the schedule, they should have actually just about to have started their presentation. So if the gap is long between the one presentation and the next one in your session, try to fill it. I've often found it quite useful to poll the audience for something. It could be a topical or perhaps controversial issue. This actually does two things. First of all, it fills the gap. And secondly, there's nothing like getting the audience to participate. It makes them excited and they feel like they're much more involved in the session. So as a timekeeper then, you're ensuring fair time allocation to all of the presenters, and you're also ensuring integration of your session with the overall program. Both of these are really important aspects of being an effective moderator. So takeaways to being an effective moderator then are, first of all, this is a leadership commitment that really does require certain skills. As we've discussed, it requires that you are very comfortable speaking in public, that you have good organizational skills, that you're able to manage the session and lead the session. This is, you are going to be in a leadership role running the session, and you want to run it smoothly and effectively. But by running it effectively, it really involves three roles. It involves you being a stage setter, as we've discussed, as a facilitator, and also as a timekeeper. So effectiveness in all three of these will ensure excellent session management and will create a positive atmosphere for information exchange and learning. So thank you so much for your interest in moderating a session at our annual meeting. I hope you found this micro video helpful as you prepare to be a moderator.